Hello, everyone. Hubert here, and a really special guest today here with me, Steve Hogarth from the legendary band Marillion. Hello, Steve. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, I'm just waking up.
All right. Yeah, it's in the morning when we meet. But let's start from the beginning. What are your, I would say, early music influences? What were you listening to, and being a fan maybe while growing up, actually?
Beatles. I was 7 years old, I think, and when my mum and dad bought me a record player for Christmas, and I got "She Loves You," "I Want to Hold Your Hand," um, and I got "Not Fade Away" by the Rolling Stones, and "Tired of Waiting for You" by the Kinks. So
Okay.
my earliest influences were really the Beatles, the Stones, the Kinks, plus whatever was on the radio at the time. Um, in the '60s. So '60s music started me off really, and I became completely addicted to the Beatles. Um, and made that journey through Revolver and Sergeant Pepper, and
Hmm.
then through to Abbey Road. Um, they were all really, really important moments for me. And I was only, what, I don't know, 10 years old by then. But I was nuts about all of that. And then later on, I got I got into the Who.
Hmm.
I really liked the Who. And then in the '70s, I got into um, well, rock music was being invented in the '70s. There wasn't rock, rock music didn't really exist until bands like Deep Purple
Yeah.
kind of invented rock music. And the night I went to see them play at Sheffield City Hall was the night I decided to be a musician.
Hmm.
Um, Before that, I'd never imagined I would be a musician. But then I went and I saw Deep Purple, and I sat there and just thought, God Almighty, this is incredible. This is what I should be doing. Um, Nothing's better than this. So why should I do anything else? I better learn how to make music. And I was 17 by then, and I went home and started nagging at my parents to get me a piano. And they got an old piano and put it in the back room, and I taught myself how to play it. And so that was the beginning of me being a musician. Up until then, I was just studying, physics.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't studying music at all. I was not interested in studying music. Um, so it went from there, and then when I went to college, I was then discovering bands like, well, before college really. I went to a party one night and heard Yes for the first time, and heard
Hmm.
Genesis first time, and Led Zeppelin, and they all blew my mind completely. And so then I used to go and see them when they were touring with all of those albums. So I
Hmm.
saw Genesis tour with every album. I saw Yes tour with every album. Um, and Focus as well. I discovered Focus, their Moving Waves album. So once I was 17, I started getting into a lot of progressive rock music.
Hmm.
And then I went past that then, and I got into Prefab Sprout and the Blue Nile and Thomas Dolby and all the stuff that was happening in the '80s. And then the albums that Trevor Horn was producing, ABC, The Lexicon of Love, and the Frankie stuff, and then Slave to the Rhythm.
Hmm.
So pretty broad taste.
Yeah, and now let's jump to 1989 when you joined Marillion. How do you remember that time? How do you remember the time while you were joining this legendary, I would say, right now band?
Yeah, I wasn't really that conscious of it being a big deal.
Hmm.
Um, Mainly because the boys in the band were always so unpretentious. They're very unpretentious people. And whenever I would kind of get that feeling that this was a huge thing, they'd go, "Oh, don't worry about that. It'll all be fine." They're very down to earth people. So I kind of inherited that way of looking at things from them. We tend to keep each other's feet on the ground. Um, so it was easy. When I met them, it was obvious we had a certain musical chemistry. We didn't have to work too hard at putting the songs together. And then we went to a very nice residential recording studio called Hook and Manor um, to make Season's End. And the sun shone every day, and I was just wandering around this huge house and these huge gardens and sitting by the swimming pool listening to Slave to the Rhythm
Hmm.
and drinking Pims, and teams of young girls would bring me club sandwiches and things. It was very decadent, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, to be honest.
All right. We're living at the times while I would say there's a lot of pressure on artists while picking the singles, putting out the singles, and some people might, I would say, maybe forget about the album thing that is really important, formats, especially in rock, progressive rock, and in metal music. And do you think that the albums will always survive? And if yes, then why? What is the most important thing in that particular format?
Well, it depends what you want out of the art form, really. The listener. Some listeners, a lot of listeners, I guess, now are having their attention span squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, where even a single is too long.
Hmm.
Uh, Everything is like a 7-second soundbite on TikTok or
Yeah.
whatever. And my children, or certainly my youngest children, are getting used to the idea of everything being short and then on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing.
Hmm.
And so if that's what you're looking for, then that's what you're going to find. But there will always be people, I think, have a different outlook on music and think of it more in terms of works of art.
Hmm.
And if you want a work of art, then you want an album, really, because it's hard to produce a work of art in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Some people do it. Trevor Horn can do it, but to to create something really astounding that works in a very very short time frame is tricky, and you really need the time for something to be able to breathe and set a scene. Um, you wouldn't go and see a piece of theatre that was 3 minutes long.
Hmm.
You wouldn't have time to sit down in the theatre before it was finished. So I think if you're looking for art, if you're looking for music as an art form, then you're always going to want an album. And the artists who create those things are always going to want to work within that format because 3 minutes isn't going to be long enough.
Hmm.
I mean, as far as Marillion is concerned, we're sometimes 3 minutes into a song before I start singing.
Yeah.
So you, yeah, it'd be over before I got started. So, I hope there'll always be a market for albums. I think there'll always be people, even young people, who turn away from the 10-second soundbite and go looking for something else, and discover Dark Side of the Moon or something, and think, fuck, hang on a minute, this is another thing.
Yeah.
And I think those records will always stand up as astounding moments in time, and I think they're timeless as well.
Yeah. So is it the way how you listen to music as a listener, as a fan? Is it like, you have some maybe special rituals, sitting, putting the vinyl on, or how are you listening to music these days when we're living at the times of, streaming, Spotify, all that stuff?
Well, I'm not much of a listener anymore because
Mhm.
I can kind of hear how it's all done. Um, I can see how a lot of music has been made and why it's been made. And because I've been a musician so long, I tend to be a little bit more analytical about it.
Mhm.
And that takes some of the pleasure of it away.
Yeah.
It's like if you're a painter and you look at the Mona Lisa and you're thinking about the brush strokes, which kind of pigment he's used for each color, then suddenly you're no longer blown away by it. You're analyzing it and you're going, oh yeah, I see what's happened here. He's done this and then he's put that on top and then he's
Yeah.
rubbed that out and he's moved that over there. And that's kind of how I hear music a lot of the time now. And because of that, I tend to prefer listening to music that I don't understand.
Mhm.
Um, I don't really understand dub reggae. I don't know how to make dub reggae. So I enjoy listening to dub. I like all of those, because there's something kind of earthy and human about that. I mean, nobody plays dub reggae to a click track. It's, they smoke a joint and then get a feeling
Yeah.
going. So it's a different approach, a different way of making music, and I don't really understand it, so I can enjoy it a lot more. Same with Arabic music. I don't really understand Arabic music, but I enjoy hearing it so
Mhm.
much more because I don't know how they're doing it. Um, Pop music and rock music, I don't really listen to so much anymore.
Mhm. Okay, so I suppose, and these were really good times that you're having a lot of sentiment to, the 60s, the 70s while you were growing up. And
And
it,
the 80s.
yeah, and all these things were new for you. And you could, you probably could enjoy while listening to rock music. And yeah, right now you have to, discover new genres, new things that, as you said, you don't maybe understand.
Yeah, and as a creative person, when we're working on our own records, we tend to we tend to approach that in a very random and natural way. So we're not trying to make it sound like anything. We're not trying to make it sound like someone else.
Hmm.
And we're not trying to make it sound like us either. We're trying to avoid making a record that sounds like something we've done before.
Yeah.
So we're trying really to get away from everybody, including ourselves, when we make these records now. Um, and I try not to think about other artists or other genres. I just try to reach about in the darkness, really, for whatever comes out of the darkness.
Hmm. And while talking about maybe lyrics, how what are your, I would say, biggest inspirations that are, helping you while writing lyrics?
Well, I used to say that injustice drove me more than anything to
Mhm.
write words, whether that was an injustice that I perceived that had been dealt against myself, either personally or emotionally or romantically,
Mhm.
uh, or an injustice that I read about in the newspapers or see on TV used to make me want to write something. Um, More recently, in the last few years, I think I've been driven a bit more by fear and by anxiety of
Mhm.
where everything is going, and what the future holds. Is starting to be something I'm writing about more and more because I'm feeling more and more concerned about it.
Mhm.
Uh, so the last two Marillion albums, I think, have been driven more by fear and anxiety than anything else.
Okay. This autumn and winter, there's a lot of shows to play for Marillion, but also your solo shows, especially this one in Poland, in Łódź this time. And what are your expectations about this particular show, and what could your fans in Poland expect about it?
Well, my Christmas shows, I mean, all of my solo shows are pretty random. I don't have a set list, and I
Hmm.
walk on stage. Even the T-shirt I made for this tour just says "Nice people in a room with Mr. H. What are we going to do?" Question mark. And that's really the ethos of these shows, that we're all going to get together and then we're going to decide what we're going to do. And that's
Okay.
me as well. Um, so the idea is you come along to my show and you can be part of it as well. It's a Christmas show. I'm going to put a Christmas tree on stage, and I'm going to invite members of the audience to bring a bauble with them to hang on it,
Hmm.
so that in between the songs, people can come up on stage and dress the tree. Um, and if they do, I'll give them a shot of tequila or something before they leave.
Okay.
Uh, so I like the idea that the audience is involved in my shows. I like the idea that there's a certain level of chaos in the shows
Hmm.
for everyone. Um, and regarding the music, I usually don't have a set list. Maybe I'll rehearse maybe four times as many songs as I'm likely ever to play, and then decide what to do. Um, I'll take requests if people want to hear a certain song.
Hmm.
I'll try and bash my way through it. I'll also play music, that has meant something to me, that has had some kind of an effect on my life over the years. Um, so things that are precious to me for whatever reason. I've been known to play quite a lot of covers
Hmm.
by perhaps artists that you wouldn't expect me to cover. Bob Dylan, Kate Bush, Leonard Cohen, the Beatles, ABBA.
Yeah.
Um, so Glenn Campbell, did I mention him? So just whatever it takes me, in the moment is what I'll do.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of an adventure for everybody. So I hope people come, and because it's nothing like a Marillion show, which is much more structured.
Yeah.
Uh, my shows are extremely, in the moment,
Hmm.
and can change direction even during a song. If I get bored, I'll stop and I'll play another one. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll just read a lyric out. I won't sing it. I'll just read it out like a poem.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes I read from my diary.
Okay.
So everything's possible. They're very unique evenings, these.
All right. So it seems like it's a lot of, fun, celebration in, artists' way. So everybody save the date, December 7th, Łódź, Poland, and join the party, I would say. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, I've heard that you are a football fan, as probably everybody in UK. Uh, you can tell me if is it true? And I read it that you're a fan of Manchester United, and why actually this one particular legendary club?
Well, it was because I used to live in Doncaster. I grew up there when I was a kid, and they, there's a football team called Doncaster Rovers,
Mhm.
who are not very good, to be honest, and never really were. They never did very well. They were always in the third or the fourth division.
Okay.
And one time I went there because there was a testimonial match, which was like a special charity match to raise some money for a guy who was retiring. Because back in those days, there wasn't really a lot of money in football. They weren't millionaires like they are now.
Yeah.
Uh, and I went to see this testimonial match, and George Best was playing in this testimonial team at the height of his brilliance. And I stood there and watched George Best play and thought, my God. And I sort of became enchanted by this guy and the way he played football. And because he was in Manchester United, I became a Manchester United fan. It was entirely George Best's fault. And then that same year, they won the European Cup. They beat Benfica, the
Mhm.
Portuguese team, and won the European Cup with Bobby Charlton and Nobby Stiles and all of those people, and Dennis Law. Dennis Law was was one of my heroes when I was at school as well. So I sort of became really invested in Man United back then when I was really young. And so then that never really leaves you, does it? You tend to stick with the same team.
Yes.
But to be perfectly honest, I'm just as happy watching Manchester City play these days. I think they play incredible football.
Yeah.
Uh, and I've become someone who just appreciates the beautiful game, and I will sit and watch match of the day, and I will watch them all. I'm just as
Mhm.
happy watching Liverpool, um, even though these teams are supposed to be arch enemies. I don't really feel like that about football. I just appreciate it for what it is.
Okay, so you enjoy the most watching Premier League these days, or maybe the Champions League, because all these teams that you mentioned are obviously playing in the Champions League. The Premier League is like a number one league in the world right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't tend to watch the lower leagues much.
Hmm.
I'm not one of these guys who just is stuck with Doncaster Rovers all his life. I, g- I'd rather I'd rather watch people who know what they're doing.
So don't watch the Polish league Ekstraklasa because
Oh yeah.
but
Well,
but
I love to watch the World Cup as well. I love to see the national teams
yeah, yeah,
play.
yeah, yeah. But actually, like 2 weeks ago or something, Legia Warszawa, Warsaw, the team from Warsaw, won with Aston Villa in the Conference League. So that's a big deal for our Polish football that our team, won with the Premier League
A
team.
Premiership team. Yeah, well done.
Uh, and how would you compare? Because you remember these days all these legends, like you said, George Best. I don't remember these times, as I just heard about it from the books or something. Uh, how would you compare these, times like the 80s or something, the 70s, where football may be more kind of romantic than these days? How would you compare it to the football these days?
Well, it was much more violent back then. The rules were a lot looser.
Mhm.
You were allowed to kick people, and you were allowed terrible acts of violence that are not allowed anymore. And it's good that they're not allowed anymore. It was a much rougher game. The pitches were usually just mostly made of mud and lumps of earth, and so it was a rougher game. The balls were harder. It wasn't so high tech as it is now.
Mhm.
It's a bit like Formula One now compared to how motor racing used to be in the 50s. Um, there's, that's quite a valid comparison. Everything has become very high tech and very rarefied. In the old days, it was rough and ready, and so people like George Best and Bobby Charlton were incredible players because they were working with much under much rougher circumstances
Mhm.
than now. But having said that, you know, how do you compare? I don't know. You can't compare. Can you compare George Best to Lionel Messi? Maybe, I mean, Lionel Messi's incredible to watch. Kevin De Bruyne, I've never seen anyone pass a ball with more brilliance and almost like a sense of ESP.
Yeah.
What knows what's going to happen before it happens.
Mhm.
I think Kevin De Bruyne is an absolute joy to watch. He's injured at the moment, so he's not in the team, and I think they really miss him
Yeah.
because he's a totally inspirational footballer. So I think there's something in every era to enjoy. Things always grow and change and become more high tech over time. But there's always room for a genius human being to shine.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Steve, for this amazing conversation. Talking about music and football was totally a pleasure for me. And everybody that listens to us or watching us, save the date, Steve Hogarth in Łódź, December 7th. Thank you so much and all the best for the upcoming shows and all the best for you, man.
Thank you. Don't bring a ball. I'm shit at football.
Bye bye.
Bye.